Hello everyone, welcome back to Off the Shelf, the podcast where we take books off of our shelves and into our hearts. Today marks November, which for some people means the first day of post-Halloween lull, and for others it means it's the first day of pre-Christmas hype. For me, November has always meant a lot of things. Most of all, when I was in school, it meant paper writing season and being just about fed up with deadlines and obligations and stressing out too much about the end of the semester, which is always just coming up way too quickly. It also usually meant getting a cold, foolishly pushing my way through all of those obligations regardless, either from home or not, and finally getting to the end of the term and crashing just in time for work to get crazy and need all hands on deck. In terms of my reading, it's also regularly been the time that I begin to realize how many of the books I was meaning to get to this year that are still unread. But what I say to that now is no more. We aren't here to stress about the New Year's resolutions that never were. And we're not here to put unnecessary pressure on ourselves to read now, more, and always faster, or really do anything with those demands. We're here to enjoy the trip, whatever it throws at us. In saying this, I want to be as transparent as possible about where I'm at. To be honest, I've been in a bit of a reading slump lately. Reading has sometimes started to feel like a bit of a non-preferred activity, a chore. I've been busy otherwise, and like everyone else, I have a lot going on. But I'm here to share with you both the ups and downs of my reading journeys and experiences. And so that's what I'm going to do. We all have both in this life, ups and downs, and that's okay. Today, I'm here, first of all, like in all of our past months so far, to announce and introduce our monthly book club read. After that, as usual, I'd love to take a bit of time to just talk bookish with you, because honestly, if I haven't already made it painfully obvious, I could talk about books forever and a half. So, firstly, this month we're setting our focus on Last Night at the Telegraph Club, a 2021 release by Malinda Lo. Even just judging by the book's tags and categories on its Goodreads page, I get the feeling that this book pulls together a lot of threads that aren't always pulled together by just any other writer. Lo is being pretty bold here, I think, in how many layers the story has to juggle. The book is classed as young adult lit, as historical fiction, as LGBT+ romance, and some of its other tags include racial and ethnic tensions, American nationalism, gender, and women's empowerment and coming of age. The acclaim, reviews, and blurbs on the book's back cover come from everywhere, from other best-selling YA authors to online editorial reviewers like Kirkus Reviews to pop culture media sources like BuzzFeed, and it's also gotten a lot of attention and buzz on social medias, especially through BookTube and TikTok. I heard about this book pretty early on in its life, but I've been putting off reading it because, if I'm being honest, I always get a little bit afraid and intimidated by the idea of reading hugely hyped books. They almost always surprise me, and it's about a 50-50 that surprise is a good one or a bad one. From what I've heard about this one, I have hope, and regardless, it's bound to be an experience worth sharing here. From the book's dust jacket, the synopsis begins with a short excerpt from the novel. Quote, "That book. It was about two women, and they fell in love with each other. And then Lily asked the question that had taken root in her, that was even now unfurling its leaves and demanding to be shown to the sun. Have you ever heard of such a thing?" Unquote. The description continues. 17-year-old Lily Hu can't remember exactly when the question took root, but the answer was in full bloom the moment she and Kathleen Miller walked under the flashing neon sign of a lesbian bar called the Telegraph Club. America in 1954 is not a safe place for two girls to fall in love, especially not in Chinatown. Red Scare paranoia threatens everyone, including Chinese Americans like Lily. With deportation looming over her father, despite his hard-won citizenship, Lily and Kath risk everything to let their love see the light of day. So you can probably see what I mean about this book trying to do a lot of things at once. I'm really excited to see how Lo pulls all of it off in the end. Judging by the respect and love she's garnered since its release, like I said, I have a lot of wary, carefully placed hope in this one. I still don't know exactly what I'm expecting from it, but that's what I want. Sometimes I think the worst thing we can do for our reading is to walk into a book with too many expectations and prescriptions and assumptions. I'm really, really interested to see how this one manages the balancing act it's got going on. And I don't want expectations for that. I want to take it as it is and not walk into it with an idea of how I want it to be. I'm curious to see if any pieces get lost in the rest of them. I'm just excited to dig into it with you all. As a final disclaimer, I will say that this book deals with sensitive topics related to racial discrimination and xenophobia, homophobia, and sexism. There's also a posted warning for the use of some racial and gender-related slurs to be aware of. I'm anticipating a hard-hitting book. I'm also expecting to learn a lot, not only about the topics themselves and the history embedded in the story, but even just the awareness of how much I don't know about other people's lives and experiences throughout society and throughout history. I'm really excited to jump into this one, but I also feel it might be the best for us all to take it a bit slowly, if that's what we feel we need to do. I find that with a lot of historical fiction, and I'm expecting this one to be no different. Just take it as it comes to you, and take it slow if it turns out to be heavier than you expected. For today, from here on out, no real specifics. For now, we're moving on from the book itself, though my main focus for today is sort of related too. I want to talk about historical fiction as a genre, its different elements and aspects, its various types and the ways it can be done, and how similar or different it can be to nonfiction, and how the two can blend together. Also, on a more personal note, when it works for me and when it doesn't. Like my feelings on nonfiction, historical fiction is a genre I've really grown to love throughout my life, but it didn't necessarily start out that way. If I didn't admit that I can still be pretty choosy about it, then we might run into problems. So, without further ado, let's talk about historical fiction. The most general definition I could find on the genre is this. Historical fiction is a genre where the story takes place in the past. Pretty straightforward, and pretty hard to argue, but that definition to me encompasses so much. Maybe too much. There are so many different directions and angles an author can take when they write a work of historical fiction as it is. By this definition, though, we could include a lot of books that I would class as fantasy or paranormal, or even like our book club read for this month as young adult LGBT romance. There is a lot of crossover there, and I don't know how helpful or useful it is to be so general about it. Books can be more than one thing, and sometimes some aspects are just more frontlined than others. But I think it helpful to be maybe just a little bit more discerning than that. To me, historical fiction implies some element of nonfiction, and in more than just the fact that the book takes place at a certain real point in the past. Like, yes, 1856 was a year that really happened, but having a story take place in that year doesn't necessarily make the book historical fiction. I don't know if everyone would agree with me on that, but to me, true historical fiction is a work that really interacts with the time period in which it takes place. The fiction, the story that the author wants to tell, will be structured and confined in a lot of ways by the nonfiction. Their chosen time period, the setting, and the plot all have to align with certain events, have to take their shape according to fact. More than just having the characters acknowledge the events that happened in that time period, the time period itself makes the story what it is. It guides and directs the lives that the characters lead. The setting itself is a character, which introduces conflict and challenges through unchangeable fact that can't be manipulated even by the character's best efforts. Going too far out of the real makes the story disengaging for those who know what those facts are. And if there's anything I've picked up about people who usually gravitate toward historical fiction as a genre, it's that they usually generally know their stuff, or they're well on the path to learn more about it. Historical fiction doesn't need to be based on or inspired by specific truths, though it can be, but in my opinion, there also shouldn't be any clear or blatant untruth about it. What makes it fiction is that it didn't actually happen as the author writes it, but what makes it historical is that you think, as you're reading, there's no real reason here why it couldn't have. Historical fiction is at its most powerful when it is as well researched, authentic, and accurate to the time in which it's taken place as it can be. This can be really hard because history is complicated, much more so than our history books make it out to be. Even though the past itself is absolute, our knowledge of it isn't. A book can be written based on fact as we know it, and then something else, some other hidden piece of that history comes out and adds nuance or even contradicts what was already written about. Dedicating ourselves to portraying a history that we didn't live through takes expertise and humility, and even then, sometimes that isn't enough. Even with our best efforts, there are often gaps and holes in our knowledge that we have to interpret and fill in ourselves, and there's no guarantee of that truth. going as closely as possible to the source of those stories, either to the actual people themselves or to their personal primary accounts of those events, can be an author's most reliable and valuable asset, and even then, it isn't absolute. The human mind is a flawed thing, and we don't always remember things exactly the way they happened years and years down the road, even being a first-hand witness to those events. One person's account, as well, can only really speak for that one person. Portraying history with accuracy and authenticity is maybe the historical fiction writer's most significant challenge. And what maybe makes that the most difficult to overcome is because the way that we tell the truth has to change shape so quickly, so easily, and so often based on new knowledge. Another closely related difficulty to this is striking a healthy balance between portraying characters and events as realistically and truthfully as possible, that is, replicating the way that the characters would have spoken and the social norms to which they conform, doing all of that, and keeping dialogue and character readable and understandable and enjoyable. Personally, I've read both, characters who are said to be born in the 1920s and living through World War II, and yet talk and act as if they're 16 in the 60s or even in the 2000s. And I've also read characters who live in the 19th century whose dialogue just feels too pinched, so rigid that they don't even feel human, completely devoid of emotion and feeling and all the things that let us come to care about them as characters. All of these things come together to make a work of historical fiction believable and enjoyable. It's a lot of immersive work. Balance between all those things is maybe the writer's greatest asset. The best part about it is that when it's done well, that effort shows, and it makes everything worthwhile. So, if there's so much working against us in writing historical fiction, then why is it such a popular genre to work in? If there is so much that can make a book not work, then why is it so popular to read? Why not just read history books or go to the primary texts to find out what happened and the way those events made people feel, and how it shaped their lives and continues to shape ours? Personally, one of my answers is that historical fiction is really powerful in its ability to help us mediate the real, the factual, especially the scary. Fiction in general helps us to handle our anxieties, our fears, and our pasts, and historical fiction is no different. It helps us to come to terms with the events that shaped the world that shaped us. It helps us to dig into not just the what of history, but the why, and to speculate on the way that we might have fared differently or the same living those lives. It makes history more approachable, more personal even, to read about characters who are our own age, who lived through those events. Even if it isn't trying to tell a necessarily true story, it allows us to take in history just as that, as a story, as ordinary or extraordinary as any other. It gives us refuge in the knowledge that we, in our own times, aren't the only ones who face struggles. And like those others who came before us, there's a lot more in us than we might think to overcome our own struggles. Something I really love about historical fiction books is that they open us up to a lot of knowledge about more than just the history of us specifically. They offer doors into other parts of the world, with no real barriers but the author's own knowledge and research. And it makes accessible so much more than we could possibly learn from the textbook description. Sometimes no more than a paragraph, often written by the winners, and always so far removed from the actual people that it's like the tail end of a game of telephone. For the best of the genre, there is so much care that goes into portraying accuracy, and so much responsibility to accept in doing so. And as someone who loves a good historical fiction book, I bow down to anyone who takes on the challenge. This month, as we read through Last Night at the Telegraph Club, if you decide to pick it up, pay close attention to the attention to detail, to the evidence of research. Think about what it means for an author to accept so much responsibility in their writing, and consider why that matters so much, in a worldly sense first of all, but in their own personal sense as well. Again, no writer writes for no reason. It's to tell a story. To greater or lesser degrees, it's to tell their stories. For an author of historical works, part of telling that story is putting on display how much that history plays into their personal, how much that history still speaks to and still matters in their present. For today, I'm going to leave you here. If you get the chance this month, I encourage you to pick up Last Night at the Telegraph Club with me and learn something that you might not have ever known about without doing so. We'll talk again soon with a check-in chat on the book, but until then, take good care and happy reading. The Off the Shelf podcast is a proud member of the Ordinary Podcasting Network. To learn more about this podcast or the network, please visit ordinarypodcast.com. Finally, thank you for listening, and if you haven't already, please subscribe or leave us a comment. Thank you so much, and take care.